and it was talking about Isreal, Philippi. And I've been there 2 times.
Okay.
And I can imagine, Paul being there with Felix or with Festus and what he was going through in that place.
My name is David Small, and I'm going to be your host on this journey today. And I'm not going to get too deep into opening monologue here because I want to get back to the part 2 of the interview that we started last week with James. And if you have not listened to part 1, please go back and check that out. It's a really great interview, and it's really great to get the opening part of this interview. But James is the current chief of staff for the Free Burma Rangers, and he and his wife, Sarah, and their family gave up a career in the Fortune 500 companies in America and moved over to Southeast Asia, where they currently serve as missionaries. And the second part of the interview is really interesting. And one of the great things that James does is run a program called the Color Code, and he's going to get into explaining a little bit about the Color Code in this next part of the interview. And so I hope you enjoy it. We've got lots of exciting stuff coming up on the podcast, and as we get the school going, it's really exciting. And if you haven't checked out TV show episode number 5, you can go and check that out on our website. And if you haven't gotten yourself a Make Burma Great Again hat or a JDS sweatshirt, the winter's coming. You might want to get yourself a hoodie. But you can do that on the www.junglediscipleshipschool.com. You can check those out, and you'll look super cute wearing the JDS swag. And all the profits and the proceeds from these sales will go right back to supporting the Jungle Discipleship School. And I'm super thankful that you're with us. I'm super thankful for all your prayers and your support. And I'm super excited for this coming year. So without further ado, let's get back to our interview with James on part 2. How was that transition for you and Sarah and your kids to say, hey, I'm leaving, a good job, a good income, something you're talented at, something you enjoy, to move to the other side of the world?
Yeah.
To something that in a lot of respects is a little bit chaotic and crazy.
Sure. Well, it was difficult. One detail at play was, I remember going to these Bible studies with a bunch of people who had grown up in the church. And I'm embarrassed even now to say this. There was this one Bible study I was at, and I'd been a Christian for, 4 years, but I was young, and I knew better, but I mistook Paul for Peter in a comment that I made. And I was so embarrassed. And then
woe is me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just stupid. But I thought, I don't know the Bible as well as I want to know the Bible. And I'm also, as you know, a pretty structured kind of guy, and I thrive in that. So I said, I'm just going to start taking some classes. And so it took me about 7 years to do a 2-year master's degree in Christian studies, but I ended up doing that mostly in the evenings.
Yeah.
So in 2019, while I'm still working for this company, I graduated with this degree in Christian studies.
Okay.
And I never thought I'd do anything with it. But I was, a lay leader at churches. But Sarah did have this desire to go into cross-cultural ministry. And we went to China in 2013 on a vision trip with the Navigators.
Okay, yeah,
Maybe familiar with them. And despite some really cool things that we saw and connections that we made, we just didn't feel like God was calling us to that yet. But then in around 2017, we felt like God was maybe, moving that direction again. And I was growing closer to God. I was beginning to put my family more in the proper place, because one of the things about corporate America is it can easily suck you into 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks. And I would leave the house
Like
usually
they don't particularly care about your work-life balance.
Yeah, when you get to a point, if you want to work that much, you can, and you'll be rewarded for it. I mean, it's not like they force you to,
Right.
But if you want the promotion more so than the guy in the office next door, well, then you want to produce more.
Right.
At least give the perception that you are. And sometimes that just means being around or taking on this project or that project, and being willing to travel to this conference or whatever the case may be. And so, I mean, I played that game. I was, as a plant manager with a plant that was running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was always something.
You could be there doing something at any time, any day.
Yeah, and one of the things that was true in our situation was I kind of got this reputation as a plant fixer. And so I actually managed 4 different plants in 4 different parts of the country in 8 years.
Okay.
And so we moved,
So like a plant is in trouble, something's not working, they're having their mess, they call you and you go and sort it out.
Yeah, so I became the new plant manager. The old plant manager would either get fired or move to a different job. And they let me usually bring in a few new staffers that I could pick from around the company, new staff, and build a new team, and then turn it around. And in all 4 cases, it worked out.
Wow.
And I always tell people, like, what's the secret? The secret is just love. Just love people. If you love people, it's amazing, what potential capabilities they are able to realize.
Okay, it's funny you say that, because if you were to read, first of all, if you go and do an MBA somewhere, are they going to teach you a class on love? If you read these books on working your way up the corporate ladder, is love a part of, I don't read a lot of that literature anymore, but is that a thing? Do people talk about love in corporate America?
I wouldn't say that they use that word.
Okay.
But the concept and the notion of servant leadership isn't foreign to an MBA course, right? Good leaders taking care of their people and serving their people. I think it's, most people know that's an important element. However, I would say it's by no means the major point in an MBA course or in business leadership discussion.
But for you, you found that you go into a plant that is a mess and you need some fixing, and to start by loving people helps the process.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was in, Burma just about a month ago, and so there's this.
You were in a big fight in Burma a month ago.
It was pretty ugly. It was probably the closest call I've had to date. I was in one spot where a mortar landed from a Y-12 aircraft and killed a young man. And me and a couple other guys were in that spot probably about 3 minutes prior to that mortar landing. We were just around the corner, no more than 30 yards away. But when I was in Burma, and I tie this back to particularly the first plant I took over, the first big plant I took over. When you don't have anything else, when you don't have anything, that's kind of the definition of being poor, right? And so there's the story that Jesus tells, the woman who gave out of her poverty, right? Gave everything she had, whereas everybody else gives out of their wealth or their abundance. And as when you come here, especially when you go to Burma, if you came from America, I grew up in a trailer park.
Okay.
With a single mom, what many might consider poor. We were definitely lower class by income standards. But even that, compared to what we see when we go into Burma, is a degree of wealth, right? So sometimes it's hard to feel wealthy. I mean, feel poor when you come from the context that we come from, Westerners. And so, that parable can sometimes feel hard. Like, how do I identify with that woman?
Right.
When I don't ever really feel poor. But a mutual friend of ours, Dr. John Shaw, put it this way: when you have nothing else to give in a certain circumstance, what do you give? That's when you're giving out of your out of your poverty.
Yeah.
And so when I was in Burma, this last time, I'm with, guys that we both know, like Blake, who have incredible skills, Dave, who's been there for so long, have skills, John, who's a doctor.
Right.
And I'm there just thinking, what am I doing here? Like, I can, there's no Excel spreadsheet anywhere around. What do I have to offer?
Yeah.
But what I offered was just love and prayer. I prayed with every single guy in the front line that I could. I hugged them.
Yeah.
I took pictures with them. Just, it was all I could give because it was all I had.
And put a smile on their face, like,
yeah,
I'm here with you. I'm not leaving. I'm with you. Like, this is dangerous, but I'm here.
That's all I had.
Yeah.
That's all I could give. And I think about the first plant that I took over. The product that we made at that first plant, I'd never made that product. I knew nothing about those processes. I wasn't a great engineer. And a lot of people like, why are you here? I think I was 29 at the time. And it was the biggest plant in our company, arguably, definitely by revenue. And I know a lot of people are like, why is this kid leading this plant?
Right.
And it's not like I was smarter than anybody.
How many employees would that plant have had?
That had, at the time, I think we were just over 200.
And you were responsible for them all?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay.
Most people working for me were older than me.
Yeah, sure.
And but what I could give was love. And so I couldn't solve any engineering problems, but I could love these guys. What can I do for you? Was my most common question. How can I help you? And instead of being in my office, I would go out on the plant floor and just try to figure out, okay, what can I, of course, I was still the leader and I still had to set vision and I still had to bring the team together and I had ways of doing that. But my job was to equip and empower them to do what God had given them gifts and talents to do.
In the engineering, in the manufacturing roles that they had.
In whatever role they had.
And I feel like it's pretty mature. I feel like, for me, I think there's a part of it that is like, because I can relate to not managing a plant of 200, but like taking on what feels like maybe a role that I am not qualified for, but I'm going to take it anyways. And I just feel like there's a little bit, you've got to be a little cocky to do that. But I also think in the way that you handled it, it's like there's got to be a level of maturity to say, like, I'm not going to let this get to my head. I'm going to serve. And at 29, you said 29?
Yeah.
Like, that's a pretty mature mindset to take. And I also think about a mentor of mine says, when you enter the decade of your 30s, you should focus on building your character over your kingdom. And a lot of young people, and I guess especially in corporate America, really in their 30s focus on their kingdom. Like, I'm going to build my role and get sucked into that drive to just do more and more. And this guy suggests taking the lowest seat at the table until God makes it impossible not to do that anymore. And anyway, so if I just can ask quickly, like, how was your character forming in corporate America? And were you focused on building your kingdom or your character? And I guess I asked the question because you mentioned before about slowly your family became back into the priority and the place. And so walk me through that process.
And you asked about the transition from corporate America to the life that we live now. And so, to get back to that question, I would say that I was double-minded in many respects, in that I was serving my career and God, and instead of God first, and then everything else coming second to that. Now, I had a ministry in my plants. Like, I wasn't shy about sharing the gospel and sharing my relationship with Jesus. And I look back on that.
Was that allowed? Isn't there a process?
You're not allowed to proselytize, but in the same way that I learned from that teacher who led me to Jesus, there are certain...
Right, when the relationship allows it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are certain windows or... to tell you should believe something was, definitely something that you don't want to do, but to tell you what I believe and why I believe something was, something that I was easily able to slip into conversations, and then of course, developing relationships. But so there was some of that good stuff, but there was also just this allure of, more money than I thought I'd ever make, and the trappings of having a secretary, company truck, and flying on the corporate jet, like all of that's very attractive, and it was fun. And but I was trying to do that, and I had a growing family, and then I was doing this studying at nighttime, and it really did get to the point where I think I meant well, but I was just not. I was trying to hold on to too many things, and so I just remember reading the story of the rich young ruler and really being convicted by that.
Okay.
At some point, because was I a ruler in that sense, like a government? No, but I did have
You had
power,
authority, yeah.
authority. We had nice houses, we had brand new vehicles, a growing 401k, all that business, and a salary that I could never have imagined having in my mid 30s. And so for me, I felt like, and it took years to get to the point where I was willing to walk away. I remember thinking, like, so I was 37 or 38 whenever I finally left that job. And I remember thinking, this path here is very uncertain. Like, whatever success looks like in the mission field or this next season of life, that one, you don't even know what that looks like, and two, the chances of success, you have no gauge of that right now, James. Like, this could be a colossal failure, and you could just disrupt your entire life. And by the way, when you quit this job, there's little chance. The reason I made that much money at that point was there was little chance that I was going to. Was because I was with that same company and showed loyalty and it did things with that company.
Right.
It wasn't. I don't have the type of. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. It's not like I have a certain skill set.
Right.
That's just going to. Okay, I can.
It's
just
going
go
to
to this other
guarantee
company
you
and
a
make
job.
that amount of money, right? It's because I developed that with that specific company. So I was kind of throwing that 10 years or 9 years away.
Right, because if you wanted to go back and start a career, you have to prove yourself and your reputation all over again.
Right.
And start from the beginning, kind of.
Yeah, I think if I were to try to get a job in that industry again today, I'd probably make around a third of what I was making.
Okay. So it's a big decision then, and with your young family.
Right. Yeah, and that was all from a dollars and cents or logical perspective, it was a pretty unwise move if that's the only way you looked at it. But for me, in reading I had to prove maybe to myself, because I don't think God needed me to prove to him. Like God doesn't say like, oh, you have to perform for us, for me. You have to perform for me in order for me to love you. Like that for me, it was, do I love God enough to walk away from all those things in the way that the rich young ruler wasn't able to? And so even if coming to Thailand was going to be an absolute complete failure, I had the peace to leave the job because I knew I needed to, for myself, know that God was more important, and I knew that God was calling me to do it. And it took me a couple years to finally get to that point.
A couple years before you got here.
Yeah, well, before we even made the decision, and I waffled back and forth, like, and Sarah dealt with that frustration of like, oh,
because Sarah wanted to come.
She was ready. I mean, her faith has always, in my opinion, just always been much stronger than mine, and still is today. And she knew that God was calling, and I knew that God was calling us to this, but I came up with excuses like. Have a couple good months and we're like making these plans, like, oh no, we have to do this. We have to stay here because of this reason. And really it was fear was number one. Comfort was number two, which I think is interesting. FBR always say, don't be led by fear and comfort. Those were the two things that were keeping me from leaving. Security.
I felt the same because I left FBR this year, and I faced the same thing because it's like I've been at FBR for a decade. Yeah. And almost a decade, and it's like you get comfortable, and then to go on your own, especially on your own in a place like Burma,
where that safety net, like whenever you're operating in Burma and you have the FBR safety net,
Yeah.
it feels like, okay, it's dangerous, but if something really happens, I've got a network. And to some extent, I still feel like, okay, if I was really in a crunch, I could call FBR and they would do what they can to help. But I had to face the fear and comfort. Like, okay, I can just stay in this role that I'm in and ride it out.
Yeah.
But am I really following what God has put on my heart? And the thing that I find interesting is that it's like he doesn't leave us where he finds us. And for me, like, if the first step was, okay, move to the other side of the world and join FBR, and trust me that I will provide for you, for your for your resources, all this, and take care of you. And then he doesn't leave me at that point. He continues to grow us up, to grow me up, and then challenge me again, like, hey, okay, now I want you to take another step and leave this comfort. You're comfortable now, so take a step again. And so I can see it in your story, like, you have to face these things, and God is going to take you into deeper waters as the whole thing happens.
Well, good word, because we don't get to walk on water unless we're willing to get out of the boat, right? And in your sense, the things that I hope you're experiencing already in your journey is to need God more than you need the network of FBR, more than you need the name of FBR, right? And when we put ourselves in a position where God is all we got, that's when we get to see God the most.
Mm-hmm.
And as scary as it is, man, that's one of my favorite places to be, is when God allows me to, it gives me the, to him be the glory that I had the courage to step away from those places of comfort and just rely on him.
Yeah.
Because that draws us closer to him in ways that other circumstances don't.
I want to change subjects here briefly. We have about 20 minutes before you have to go pick up your daughter.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
20 minutes? Oh, she's just right across the road. Okay.
She's right over here at
She's dancing?
She's dancing, ballet. Good. She's really into it.
Good.
So.
Are you into it too?
Not as much.
Okay.
Yeah,
I couldn't really picture you doing ballet.
No. The other kids are at Taekwondo.
Okay.
And kind of the joke around the office right now is I do Taekwondo with my son and daughter 1 day a week.
You do?
I do.
Oh, okay.
So there's this show in America called The Office. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
There's this character called Dwight.
Yeah.
And there's an episode where it's him and just a bunch of kids in karate. That's totally me. Like,
you go into Taekwondo and
you're
like
the whole like uniform and everything.
And it's just you with a bunch of kids.
Me and a bunch of kids.
Oh, that's fun.
It's my way of just spending time with my kids.
Yeah, it's good.
So
I want to talk about color code.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know about it I never heard of it until this year when I did a seminar. Is that what we call it? A course that you and Sarah led. Mm-hmm. And I had done the Enneagram before.
Yeah.
Reluctantly, because I'm fairly like skeptical and I poo-poo all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. But it was actually when I was in counseling, and the counselor mentioned something about the Enneagram, and it just made me think about, like, okay, if I could know a little bit more insight on my own personality, I can know God better, because I'm sure I bring those strengths and weaknesses of my personal character to my relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And I react and relate to God in my style of relating. Mm-hmm. And so that's what got me kind of more open to these personality tests, or whatever you want to call it. And so then in the fall, you were running a course, a 1-day thing called the Color Code. Can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about this?
Yeah, so it's similar to things like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs in some ways, in that, you take a test and then your results, and then that kicks out some results that indicate something about you.
Okay.
And in this particular methodology, there's, as opposed to, Myers-Briggs, you have 16 different combinations, 4-letter combinations, which can be difficult to remember.
Yeah.
Even your own. Enneagram has 9, if I'm correct. Now, this only has 4. Except, your results are a composite color wheel of those 4 colors.
Okay.
You know, so for instance, I'm a primary red, so I'm 59% red, and then 20 something percent blue, and then another percentage yellow, another percent white.
Okay.
So even though it's only 4, it can also be looked at as being a lot more than just 4, because each person has a composite color wheel that looks different than
Everyone
just
else's.
about everyone else's, right?
And we are all a percentage of each color. We're not just like, for example, I think I'm a 7 on the but like besides just being a 7, I have all 4 personalities in the color code.
Right.
And I have you ever seen someone who has a 0 in a color?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it does happen.
Yeah, it does happen.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a few people at FBR who have 0 of one color.
Okay.
And so yeah, it happens. It's not common, but it happens.
But we have a spectrum of where we fit in different categories. And,
Right.
Okay.
Right. And that's what makes it interesting is it is discrete in that you are categorized into one primary color, but it also recognizes that you're more than just one color.
Right.
You are a combination of these 4 different primary motives.
Can you explain the colors?
Yeah, so one of the things that's different about this methodology is it doesn't focus on behaviors, but instead on motives. So one might say Myers-Briggs or maybe Enneagram tend to reflect more about how we respond or how we behave, particularly in different circumstances, and really our actions. This methodology seeks to go at your motive, which is the underwriting source of your behaviors, of your actions.
Okay.
And so when you take this test, the instruction explicitly asks you to look at these questions as though you are answering them from the perspective of your child self. So try to remember how you were with a child, which is one of the most difficult things about the test.
Yeah, I remember when I took the test and it asked, like, I don't know what word it used, like adolescent or childhood. How did you feel, or imagine how you would respond to this as a child? And I remember thinking like, oh, brother, like, you're losing me already.
Yeah.
But then the results was actually fairly accurate. It was interesting. I thought, at least in my own color code.
Yeah. And the idea there is that, you know, our personalities, we are innately different from each other, which any pregnant mother who's had multiple children will tell you that's true. That one child was different from the get-go than the other child, even in the womb.
Okay.
Most mothers would say, yep, different personality. And as a father who didn't carry children but have seen babies, grow up from the first day they're born, I can tell you, they're not the same from the start.
Right.
They have different personalities. And I don't think it's hard for people to accept that reality, that we have different personalities from the start and different motives from the start. And so, but what happens is as we grow up, obviously different things happen that modulate how we behave. Yet our core motive, it doesn't really change, is the idea here. Now, as Christians, of course we want our worldview, our beliefs to be formed by our relationship with God. And what we say in the color code is that we're all striving to be gold, like Jesus. And whereas I adapted this from, and I was certified in it, it's this company that does that. You have to go through the certification process. But I've been allowed to adapt it to my worldview, which is a Christian worldview, which says that, yeah, these are our colors and our motives, but we're all being sanctified, for those of us who are in Jesus, to be more like him. But knowing our start point really helps us in that. And so, you have your motive, and then you have things that help you modulate that motive to become a more charactered person over time. Or in some cases, a less charactered person over time. And there's 2 elements here, much like Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, or another one called DISC. Yeah, you get to know yourself a little bit more. I'm a red, for instance. I am a red. And
what is a red?
So a red is motivated by power.
Okay.
So the idea of getting from A to B, and that's me. I like that. I like objectives.
Solving the problem.
Not so much I want to wield power over you, although that is a temptation for reds to be in charge, to have that. But a healthy red is like the engine of a car. Move it forward. The second color would be blue that we talked about, which is motivated by intimacy or relationships.
Okay.
Just this idea of connecting
Yeah.
people. My wife, Sarah, is a blue. And so she's a deep feeler. She's much more compassionate naturally than I am. She thinks and connects with people on just a much deeper level. And for her, it's not about, when she has a conversation, it may not just be about, okay, where are we going with this conversation? What's the end state?
Right.
The conversation in and of itself is the valuable thing that's taking place, which I think is a true thing. It's just not, it's not how I'm primarily geared. The next color we talk about is white, motivated by peace.
Okay.
And yeah, it's hard to say much more than that. They're the type of people who are in a meeting and you don't hear from them until the end. But when you do hear from them, you know that they've been engaged the whole time. They just don't feel the need to make sure they interrupt every 5 minutes.
They don't like conflict.
They don't like conflict. They're, generally pretty quiet. That doesn't necessarily mean they're introverted, but they don't need to get from A to B.
Right.
They more often feel like they're already at B, and if you would just leave them alone, everything would be good.
Okay.
And then the last one is yellow, motivated by fun.
Which is my primary.
Yeah, and your primary yellow.
Mine was a primary yellow, and I don't remember my secondary.
You were a secondary blue.
Secondary blue, okay.
Yeah, which made a lot of sense to me because you are a deep feeler. You do have compassion. I've noticed that about you. But you're adventuresome. You are, you ride a cool motorcycle. I mean, these are common things.
Yeah, I do.
Your yellows generally have the coolest cars. Okay. Things like that.
If I could afford one, I'm sure I would have one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So those are the 4 colors. And the last thing I want to say about it is, and the reason I like it, is where Myers-Briggs and these other ones, they really do help you learn yourself. I like color code because it's 4 colors. And the way we present this training is to try to help people learn how to love others better. And when I was a plant manager, I'll just give you one example. I had this maintenance manager, and he was a blue. And blues can generally be detail-oriented. And for a blue, it's more important to get things right rather than to get things done right rather than to get it done right now. As a red, I'm always thinking about my next objective, the next meeting. And he would often drag these meetings out. Not all the time, but we were talking about, and I just want to get to the next meeting. I thought we had made a decision.
Right.
And my natural inclination would be to get frustrated with him in my own redness because I want to move on to the next objective. But when I remembered that he was a blue and what he wanted to do was make sure that we were catching every detail and making sure we were getting the job done right, man, I appreciated him because he's the maintenance guy and getting maintenance right is important. And that's who he is. And so knowing that about him was super valuable. I got outside my own color, and since I knew his color, I had another personality on my team that was a white personality. And I knew that they wouldn't offer their opinion. They wouldn't force their way into the conversation. But if I stopped to ask them during a meeting what their opinion was, they had good insight because they were actually listening rather than talking the whole time.
Well, and that's what sold it for me, because I'm naturally skeptical about these kind of things. But what sold it for me is that, if I know someone else's primary color or primary motivation, and I need to go and have a serious conversation with them or a meeting with them, if I know something about what is motivating them, this person's motivated by fun. They're like me. It's going to be an easy meeting. Okay, we can do this. But if it's like a white and that's their primary color and I come in guns blazing, it'll turn them off from that conversation and that meeting right away. And it's going to be so much more difficult for me to get the point across or what I'm hoping to accomplish. And so that's what sold it for me, is that it actually teaches you how to love other people better, how to work together, because we have to work together with people. And that's the church, like the church is this mess of people that we have to work together with, and we don't always agree with each other. But so in the end, I wanted to bring up color code because for me, that's what I liked about it the most was, while the other ones, like you said, focus on getting to know myself, this one was more, for me, motivated about getting to know others And so I thought it was cool.
Yeah, and I think those other ones are valuable, but what's one of the limitations to something like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram is I'm not going to remember your 4 letters.
Right.
As much as I love you, and I probably won't remember your number.
Yeah.
Because there's just too many of them.
Right.
But 4 colors, I can wrap my mind around.
Like I know you're a red, you know I'm a yellow.
Right.
It's like that's pretty simple.
Right.
But
and we could start naming people that we both know.
Yeah.
I could probably tell you their color just because I've done the seminar with them one time.
Right.
And also because in most cases, not in every case, when someone takes the test and they come out in a certain color, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. When you've been doing it long enough. Like,
right.
You don't want to typecast people, but
but you get good at recognizing characteristics. Yeah. Okay, do you have quickly time to... I want to talk briefly about Isreal because you have led a few trips. And I know when we talk about Israel in the context nowadays, it's like war. But pre this war, you have led trips taking people around the Holy Lands. And how did that begin and why... where did that come from in your story?
Yeah, well, I wasn't the primary leader.
Okay.
This was a pastor that's a good friend of mine in the States who has taken members of his church and that community that they serve in to Israel, and he's offered for me to come along and help in that.
Okay.
Whether it be teaching or just coming alongside people. And so I had the opportunity on those trips to give devotions or teach a lesson putting the place that we're at in the biblical context, and then maybe share a message either of encouragement or of insight about what's so meaningful about that place, not just in its physical geography, but in the grand spiritual geography of being a follower of Jesus or just living in the world that God created.
You've been to Israel 2 or 3 times? How many?
Twice now.
Twice,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And you recommend it?
Absolutely.
Do you think all believers should?
I mean, you don't have to. It's
not a pilgrimage, but
but I find it's
not
super
Mecca.
valuable. It's super valuable because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read a book about a place that you've been to versus a book about a place that you haven't been to.
Right.
And when you read about a place that you've been to, you suddenly in your mind picture that place. And when I just finished a devotion on Acts, and it was talking about Isreal, Philippi. And I've been there 2 times.
Okay.
And I can imagine, Paul being there with Felix or with Festus and what he was going through in that place. When I go back and read when Jesus restores Peter, when Jesus is cooking fish on the beach of the Sea of Galilee, and Peter jumps off the boat.
That's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, there's a church there, and you can go walk out kind of on the beach away from the church because sometimes the church takes away from it because you're like, well, this church wasn't here when that happened. But I gave a devotion on that and just the whole notion of how Peter was so eager to go be with Jesus again that he didn't wait for the boat to turn around. And you could kind of see the boat was probably out there as I was giving this devotion, pointing the people toward the water there at the Sea of Galilee that they could see. And then he swam and came up maybe somewhere around here, somewhere within eye's view.
Yeah.
Jesus was sitting making fish.
Cooking fish.
And every time now I read that story, my mind goes back to that place, and it's richer for me.
Right, it's making the scriptures come alive.
Yeah.
I'm a visual learner, and so for me to visualize something is, and I've always been curious about a trip to Israel, but I just hate big crowds and tourist type things.
Yeah.
And so I'm afraid of going to Israel because I'm going to be like, here we see it with like the Chinese tourists and you're following the person holding up the yellow flag, and I do not want to be that guy who's in that. So is it like that there?
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's like you're following the leader. And
so if you want to do everything that you want to do in a short amount of time, then finding a tour group is probably your best bet because they're going to maximize the efficiency of your trip, and you're going to get as much information as you can from that knowledgeable source. If you've got the time to spend a couple, even 3 weeks, and do it on your own, I would recommend that. Because finding Israel's not that big. It's like the whole country is like the size of New Jersey or something.
Okay.
I mean, getting around there is not very difficult. Everybody speaks English, at least most people do. So you don't have a language barrier to overcome. And finding these sites isn't hard. Finding the Garden of Gethsemane is not difficult. And so if you go there on your own, read about it from what you can that's already there, and then spend time, as much time as you want,
Right.
reflecting, praying, reading that portion of the Gospels, that's super worthwhile. And the same thing, going and finding, where that side of the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, that Jesus and Peter might have been, or walking around Capernaum, or the old city in Jerusalem.
I remember when I was living in Italy and I went to the Vatican, and I was by myself, but I felt like I don't want to join one of these stupid tours, and I just happened to meet this girl who was from Montreal, and she was working in the Vatican for the summer as a little guide, and she said, "Hey, how about I take you around tomorrow on my day off, and I'll show you." And she said, "You'll go into a room, and there's going to be 50 paintings or sculptures in the room, and I'll tell you the 3 that you should focus on and that are important in that for what the amount of time you have to do this." And we did this, and it was, for me, it was mind-blowing, because it was like, okay, to have somebody who knows, you could just get lost in there. And so to have somebody say, okay, forget about that stuff, focus on this one, and this is why this one is really cool or really important. And I actually really loved the Vatican, despite the tour. And so I could see myself getting over it, but I'd like to go to Israel one day. And so when I heard that you had gone and done these things, I thought, oh, that's cool, and not something I had imagined. But
yeah, well, if you're picking up the tab, I can go with you.
You'll be my private tour.
I'll be your private tour guide.
Well, I'll keep that in mind.
I'll offer a reasonable rate too, maybe a friends and family discount.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to. I have some rapid fire questions to close.
All right.
Okay.
Oh.
First of all, favorite book. One of your favorite books.
Wild at Heart.
Oh,
by Eldridge.
Okay, you're speaking my language. What about a favorite TV series?
The Office.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
Like, you can go to The Office at any, it's just so good.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And Seinfeld. Like, Seinfeld for me is like, I when you were talking about working late and stuff, I pictured this Seinfeld episode where George just gets locked out of his car and he has to leave it at the workplace because he's waiting for the CAA membership to kick in. And then his boss thinks that he's like showing up late and leaving late, showing up early, and because his car is just there all the time.
I never figured out that hack when I was working in corporate America. I should have.
Okay, what's a song you're enjoying these days? Do you listen to music?
Yeah, I do. I think the song that probably hit me the hardest, it's actually been maybe the last year, is I Speak Jesus by Here Be Lions.
Okay. I'll have to look it up. I don't know it.
Relatively new. I mean, probably a couple years old.
Okay.
But yeah, I recommend looking it up. I Speak Jesus.
Alive or dead, you can have dinner with somebody. Who would you have dinner with?
Well, Jesus would be number one.
Okay.
I'd like to meet General MacArthur.
Okay.
Like
West interesting. Point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. I wrote a couple papers on him.
Okay. Are you an introvert or extrovert?
I'm an introvert.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a celebrity crush?
Did you ever see that show Saved by the Bell?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, so Sarah knows this and she makes fun of me, but her name on the show is Kelly Kapowski.
Okay.
Her name in real life is Tiffany Amber Thiessen.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Today she's probably like 60 years old, so I don't know.
Okay.
But back then, when I was a 12-year-old, she was it.
Yeah.
And most of your listeners are going to know that, because I know I'm not the only guy that crushed on Kelly Kapowski from Saved by the Bell.
If somebody wanted to support you and Sarah, how can they give money to you? Because missionaries live on support, and
we have a website called
Okay.
.org.
Say it again.
Lana, Lanna,
Okay.
discipleship.org. It's one word.
Yeah.
It was the name of our ministry when we originally came over, because we didn't originally come over to work with FDR.
Yeah.
So, that's our website, and
Okay.
you could go there, and there's you can read a little bit more about who we are and our story, and then there's a way to donate on that website.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I hope they give you a lot of money.
I hope so too.
Do you have any final thoughts or comments you want to leave with the JDS podcast listeners, all 4 of them?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about how we both made transitions, and I just want to tell you how proud I am of you.
Uh-huh.
You know, how encouraged I am for you to go and do what you believe that God was calling you to do. And I know it was difficult for you. You were with FBR for over a decade, and you were an important. As you know, a lot of people didn't want you to leave FBR because of how much you knew and the way you did things, and the connections that you had developed with with Rangers and with our team. But what Jesus wants us to go and make disciples, go and multiply, right? And I see you doing that, and it's encouraging, and it helps us all remember that God's plan is so much bigger than just one organization. It's we're part of a large kingdom, and you are continuing to build that kingdom in a new way, and I'm encouraged by it, and I hope all your listeners are as well.
Well, thanks. And thanks for coming on our podcast and answering questions today.
My pleasure.